So I'm Ashley. I'm excited to be here talking about how to build effective teams for the new world. So we hear this all the time, right? Everything is changing. There's more competition. Everything is moving faster. Customer expectations are higher. We've got to be always on. We're reskilling. There's a war for talent, right? We're being hit with so many things. And while we know that's true, we have a hard time connecting it to what that actually means on the ground. What are we actually supposed to do about that with our teams? And so that's what I want to talk about today. I want to go through 4 things. First, I'm going to set a little bit of context for us. Next, I want to talk about how things are changing and what we can do about it across place, practices, and people. And as we go through, feel free to grab the QR code if you want to start typing in questions as we go so that we have them at the end of the presentation. We have a few minutes for Q&A. So put your questions in using the QR code and I'll answer questions at the end. So first, let's set a little bit of context. What are we talking about? So when we think of this, there's a couple of different ways for us to discuss how things are changing and how we need to react to build effective teams and future-proof those teams. So first, our people. Next, our practices. Next, products and tech. And finally, place. Now, these aren't independent, and that's one mistake that people often make. Is they say, oh, these things are changing independent of each other. They have no impact, or we don't need to think about that. If I'm managing people or I'm dealing with recruiting people, I don't really need to think about what happens to them once they get into the organization. I don't need to think about how teams work. I'm just here to recruit the people. And from a products and technology standpoint, if you think, oh, I'm not an IT, so I don't need to worry about that, or I'm not an engineer, I'm not a product manager, so I don't need to worry about that, but you forget that how we're managing people and the practices that we have to adapt to means that our technology must also come with us. And then finally, that place mindset, right? Oh, people are in the office or people are distributed. Okay, so maybe they have to have this Slack on their phone or they have to have presentations on their phone. Okay, but that fundamentally shifts how we think about our practices and how we think about the skills that we hire for and the way that we manage our teams. Next, we want to talk about who this affects. So at Atlassian, we do start with ourselves. We like to call it drinking our own champagne. Some people call it dog fooding, but we decided that that was maybe not the nicest way to put it. But we like to experiment on ourselves and say, okay, if this is changing for us, what does that affect? And what do we need to do for our customers, for our users, for the larger influencers in the space, and then finally, for the ecosystem at large. So is this affecting the entire world? Is this affecting a small subset? Of that subset, how many of them are Atlassian customers and users? And then, of course, we can go the other way and say, is this something that we need to change at Atlassian or we're experiencing? And so we can codify this in our practices and our tools to then send that out to our customers, users, and the broader ecosystem. And finally, we want to talk about when. So is this happening now? Is this something that's going on in the present? Or is this something that's going to happen in the future, or is a trend that we see that's future looking? So with those 3 faces, we can create this cube that helps us think holistically about what's changing, who it's changing for, and when that change is happening. So today, I want to focus specifically on what and when, and talk through a few trends that we think are changing for everyone. And as we do that, I'm going to share some exercises and templates which do connect with a variety of products and services from the Atlassian Team Playbook. So the playbook is completely free. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to download anything. You don't have to input your email address. You can do everything, the sticky notes, whiteboards, or if you do have tools like Trello, Confluence, Jira, Miro, Mural, we have partner tools in there as well. So there's a variety of different ways to do this. First, I want to talk about place. So that's what is changing. And I'm going to say that this is changing now. So we're going to walk through what was true and what will be true. And again, this shift is already happening. You're already seeing it in your teams. So what was true? People would clock in and out, and they work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and they come to an office. You go to your office, you sit at your computer, you have your meetings in person with your colleagues, and then at the end of the day, end of the week, you go home. You don't take your laptop with you. You don't take Slack on your phone. You don't have to be plugged in all the time. But the shift that we're seeing now is that you get to work when you're effective. You get to work anywhere with distributed teams. And now online tools enable that connection anywhere. So again, I'm dialing in from Zoom. We're having this conversation from hundreds or thousands of miles away. But consider this, time zones. You can meet with anybody in the world, but how is that going to work if you've got teams on opposite sides of the globe? So I remember when this shift to remote work was first starting, and people would send me an email, and this still happens, and they'll say, okay, yes, we want to meet at 4. Okay, 4 p.m., I assume, because nobody wants to meet at 4 a.m., but 4 p.m. where? Because if I'm in the United States, we have 3 time zones. If I'm collaborating with somebody in Sydney, that time zone overlap starts to get real short depending on what time of year it is with the daylight savings time. So even just the simple act of including a time zone when you go to book a meeting is a mental shift away from working 9 to 5 in an office in person to this distributed world. Also consider cameras on versus cameras off. So we get this question a lot. Which is the right way? And at Atlassian, we're a cameras on culture. In general, the expectation is that you have your cameras on. And the goal with that is to create that human connection. But the problem is there's actually a lot of research that Zoom fatigue is real. And one of the reasons is because actually I see myself, right? I'm talking to you and I'm seeing this movement out of the corner of my eye. If I was in person, I wouldn't see that. I would just see you and your reactions, right? The second thing is that you tend to be closer to the screen than you ever would be in real life, right? Like if I come in like this, you're starting to get really uncomfortable. And the fact that I have to look directly into the screen, how many of you in the audience are like, can you please step back? I feel it as I get closer to my computer. It's not comfortable. And so what I would say is as a team, you need to be thinking about how do you set up your ways of working to optimize for the fact that you're working anywhere across multiple time zones using mechanisms that we're not quite trained to use and that are more fatiguing than normal. So the play that I would suggest that you run is called the Work-Life Impact Play. And you can run this again with sticky notes. You can run it with a template. You could download this free PDF and print it out and distribute it to your teams. But it looks at 3 key areas. First, it looks at your environment. Where are you working from? Is it a home office? Is it actually set up well from a home office standpoint? Is it ergonomic? Is it quiet? Are you distraction free? Or are you in an office or a co-working space? How does that impact your ways of working? Next, looking at your role requirements. How complex is it? What kinds of tools do you use every day? And then finally, your support networks, both personally and professionally, because again, we bring our whole selves to work in these scenarios. Next, I want to talk about practices. And I want to talk about this shift that's happening now, specifically in management practices. So in the past, everything was hierarchical. And as agile enthusiasts, you all know that this resulted in waterfall development, right? Some boss sets a priority and they control all the information and all the knowledge about how that priority was set and all the goals. And then they pass that number down and that number gets passed down and down until it finally reaches the teams. And then they chug away at their work and they're, working and it's okay, we've got these dependencies, but then, oh, we've hit a snag and now it has to work its way all the way back up the ladder. And what we're finding is that people are realizing that these silos, this control of information, is not actually helping people be effective. They're not able to work on limited information and all of these linear dependencies when the world is moving so fast. So instead, we're seeing smaller teams, more autonomy, and in highly matrixed organizations. So consider this. You might have seen this in a project management or program management organization. This is a person whose goal is to make sure that things are working well across different teams, and they sit across multiple teams. So you've heard this concept of a 2-pizza team if you're in an engineering world, and it's basically the concept that you want your team small enough that 2 pizzas can feed them for dinner. Now, I got to be honest, I like to eat and I like pizza. So if you have me on your team, you may need to be a 3-pizza team because I'll eat a whole pizza by myself. But the concept remains. You know the difference between having to buy 200 pizzas and buying 2 to 4 pizzas, so that you know that that team knows each other's name, they understand, they've got that context on each other's work, and they have that open communication because they have that rapport. And so if we think about what this looks like and the shift that's happening now, we're moving from efficiency to effectiveness. So instead of just creating process and standardization, we're providing plays and guardrails. And we see this with agile methodology and the adoption and the spread beyond software teams into other types of teams. Instead of everything being centrally written and mandated and eliminating all variability, instead we're collaborating, we're embracing that variability and saying, what can we learn? Instead of engineering everything for predictability, we're giving this freedom for rhythm and cadence and different outcomes. We used to focus on outputs, how many hours a day, or how fast could we do something? Now we're focused on outcomes. What is the business value of doing this activity? We've moved away from this command and control, centralized decision-making, and large monolith teams into empowerment, into decision-making at the front lines. And these small, nimble teams taking different parts of work and focusing on those outputs and working whenever they're most effective to deliver these amazing outcomes. And then finally, we moved away from these centralized teams where everything was controlled and siloed into autonomous cross-functional teams that are managing based on their energy and when can we work best? How can we solve this problem? When are we our most creative? So the play I would suggest for that of keeping people in line, again, it's great that everyone's autonomous and that they have these powers, but what do we need to do to keep them on the same page? Just one second, I have a message here. Saying there is a network issue. So I'll pause for just a second. All right, we are back. So I will pick up where I've left off. So just to set context, because I'm not sure where we got cut off, we're talking about how we keep everyone aligned when we have all of this empowerment across autonomous teams. And the play that I'm suggesting here is called the DAISY decision-making framework. DAISY stands for driver, approver, contributor, and informed. So who is the person who is ultimately moving this project forward? Who's the person who actually has to approve it? And are there multiple stakeholders that need to sign off? Who's contributing to the project, actually doing the work, executing? And who might need to be informed? Where are there potential upstream or downstream impacts on these decision makers, teams, and projects? And so you want to make sure that they're informed, even though it might not be a core piece of work for them. And I also want to suggest project posters. So defining the problem space, defining potential solutions, defining milestones. These types of documents succinctly help everyone get on the same page. And they usually link to that DAISY to say who's in charge, who's contributing, how are we getting this done? And then what are we doing on what time horizon? And then any additional context that you need to keep things on the same page. So I always recommend start with a kickoff that includes a robust project poster to make sure that everyone's aligned, all the way from leadership down to your frontline folks who are getting things done. And finally, retrospectives. So it's great. You did all the things. Did it work? Were people happy about it? Did it go well? Oh, 1 minute. See, I've got another message.
Ashley, we had connection issues.
Okay.
So just got back, and the last 5 minutes, you need to recap it.
Okay.
Okay, let me
What?
1 second set it up again. 1 second. Okay, you got to go.
Perfect. I will just go through these very quickly. So the DAISY decision-making framework, DAISY stands for driver, approver, contributor, and informed. Having a kickoff meeting with a robust project poster. So the project poster helps you frame up the problem space, understand potential solutions, and gather any resources, dependencies, or research necessary to inform how you move forward. And then finally, the retrospective. So you did all the things. Now you want to take a look back and understand how did they do. So there's a couple of different ways to run a retro. We have some that we really love at Atlassian. One is called start, stop, continue. So 3 simple things. What should we start doing? What should we stop doing? And what should we continue doing? And one thing that I find is people are really good at saying, we should start doing this over here. And oh, we've also got to continue doing this. But they forget that stop in the middle. And if you just keep piling things onto your plate, you're going to lose that quality. You're going to lose that momentum because you haven't taken off the low priority things. So we actually have something where we say, basically, if we're going to add something to start, we have to take something away, and we make sure that we keep those in balance. Last, I want to talk about the people. And in this case, it's something that's happening in the future. And again, some of these shifts, if you're more progressive, you may be saying, yes, of course we're doing that. If you're maybe more traditional or conservative, you may be saying, oh, wow, that seems like a really big shift. So let's talk about what's happening with people. So in the past, we measured all of our high achieving teams primarily focused on goals. And those goals tended to be linked directly to output. How productive were you? So for example, if we look at DevOps metrics, right? Cycle time is one of those. Velocity is one of those. Deployment frequency is one of those. How fast are we getting things out there? The more you ship, the better you do. And that's part of what the promise of Agile was, that you can ship better software faster. But again, a lot of people miss that better, that quality marker. And so when we think about those high achieving teams, we start realizing, okay, from a product perspective and an output perspective, we've got to think holistically about the quality that we're shipping. And in addition to that, most companies are starting to think about the emotional well-being of their employees. Are we providing significant career growth opportunities? So you remember at the very beginning of the presentation, I commented about the war for talent and, oh my gosh, how are we going to hire all of these smart people to fuel all of these goals? Well, one of the best ways to not be in a war for talent is to retain your existing talent by giving them robust growth paths, checking in as a manager and saying, where do you want to go in your career? Not being threatened that somebody wants to move up the ladder because there's enough room for everybody to continue to climb. Next, celebrating the wins. We have a program at Atlassian called our Kudos program, and it's a way for peers to be able to recognize other peers and say, hey, you did a great job. Here's a small token of appreciation for going above and beyond. That's one way. Another way is to go into Slack and say, it's the little karma bot where you can actually just say @Ashley++. And it just shows up to say, hey, I noticed what you did. This was good work. Now, yes, all of this assumes that you've got those growth paths, you're paying people appropriately. So these are not substitutes for substantive rewards, but it is that willingness to say, good job, take somebody out for a coffee. And finally, building rapport, having that balance and belonging in your teams. Do people have open communication? Do they have that trust to be able to go into a retrospective and honestly say, this worked or this did not work? This is what needs to be improved. So the place for that, I love this one. It's called My User Manual. And it basically is a series of different prompts to help you write about how you like to work. So what are your business hours based on maybe your geography or your preferred ways of working? How do you like to communicate? What's the best way to give you feedback? What are things that energize you? What are things that bore you? And so you can start to play to your team's strength based on the different ways that they're liking to work and where their strengths and skills and expertise lie. And then health monitors. Now, we do these regularly, and it's basically a quick check-in from your team to see how are things going. And so you can do this, they're very quick, and you measure them over time, and you do it across several attributes. And you do thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumbs sideways. So thumbs up, things are going great. Thumbs sideways, things could be improved. Thumbs down, oof, we're struggling, we need to work on this. And you do this across different attributes. Now, one of my favorite things to do here is call out that you gotta make sure you're not doing a watermelon, which is green on the outside and red on the inside, right? You cut into a watermelon and it's red on the inside. So here's a great example, right? Decision making. You wanna make sure that you have the decision maker noted when you're kicking off your projects. And so if you ask everyone in your team, do we have a decision maker? And everybody says, yes, we do. Great, we're green. Your very next question should be, who is it? And if everybody yells out different answers, maybe you're not so green and you need to have a conversation about, okay, why does everyone think that this person or this person is the one who actually is making the final decision? And so you can measure this over time to keep a pulse on your team health. So of course, the big question is, how do we get there? And the answer is actually that you are the key to unleashing the potential of you, your team, and your organization. And particularly as agile coaches and agile enthusiasts and scrum masters, you're particularly well suited to help remove these silos, to help think about that future and to help drive it. So you are the key.